program again. This is our 5th living room program. We've had Leonard Maltin talking about animation. We had Steve James talking about documentary with Paul Barnes. Ethan Hawke was in the living room last week. And we had a wonderful program on John Trudell last Tuesday. Music of Strangers is one of the most popular documentaries to play in my time at the CCA. Some people didn't get a chance to see it. A lot of people wanted to see it again. And it seemed like a really beautiful film for this moment, about togetherness and about celebrating what's beautiful about the earth. So I hope you found inspiration in that. We have very special guests who I'll introduce in just a minute. I wanted to let you guys know that you can ask questions tonight. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can click on that and you can type in your question, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. We're also going to have a special guest later in the program, so stay tuned for that. We're going to send you a survey after this program. It really does help us refine the living room, which is, of course, a very new concept we got going very quickly. So if you wouldn't mind filling out that survey, which will be emailed to you sometime soon, we'd appreciate it. We have great programs coming up next Tuesday. We have Yes Men Fix the World with Mike Bonanno, one of the Yes Men, tuning in. It's a film about creative, visionary, and very funny ways to confront kind of the multinational domination of the world, another appropriate topic for the time. And then next Friday, we have one of the best films about politics and civic participation I know, Street Fight by Marshall Curry. It was nominated for an Oscar. Marshall just won an Oscar for a short film this year, and he'll be with us in the living room. And then the following Tuesday, they're all special programs, but I'm going to give a couple extra varies to this one. A very, very, very special program, which is not a film. It's Donald Nally, who is the creator and conductor of a choral group named The Crossing from Philadelphia. The Crossing's been nominated for 5 Grammys in the last 4 years. And we're going to have a listening party with some of the tracks from Donald's from his output with The Crossing, and he'll be hosted by the great opera director Peter Sellers. That's a week from next Tuesday. So check all those out. They're all on our website, and keep on attending the living room. We love being able to connect Santa Fe with great content and and talk about things that matter right now. And we're really, really fortunate to have tonight 2 wonderful, wonderful guests. Carla Gutierrez is the editor of the following films, all of which played at the CCA: Chavella, Ropatero, and When Two Worlds Collide. And of course, the Oscar-winning RBG, which is one of the best received documentaries we've had. We're very grateful to have you here, Carla. And Doug Blush, who's the editor of the film you watch, Music of Strangers, in addition to the 2018 Academy Award-winning Icarus, the 2013 Oscar-winning film 20 Feet from Stardom, the 2014 Oscar-nominated film The Invisible War, that was 2012, and a whole bunch of others. All of these also played at the CCA, and Doug has been a guest in person numerous times. Welcome back to Santa Fe, Doug, and welcome, Carla. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Amar.
It's so great to be here. I can't see any of you, but it's so special to be here, really in community and what this film is about. And I got to see it when it came out in the theater, actually, but it was so special to watch it again. And so special to be able to ask questions of Doug, because I've known him in the documentary circles for a while. But I just find that talking to the editors is so illuminating to the process, and I'm excited to just hear the insights of how this film came about. Like I said, I think it's like the film that I really needed, that I know I needed to watch, to be reminded of how I am one with the entire world right now, even though we're so separated. And I've been finding lately that filmmaking and working in a film right now as an editor is also giving me, the peace of mind that of not just kind of getting into the darkness of, that we're all going through with this crisis. So I wanted to ask you, to start asking you by talking a little bit about the team and what inspired this film. Like, what was that trigger, that like spark that the team had to go out there and get this story that we watched?
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks, Carla. It's a pleasure to talk to you because I'm in the room with giants here. I love the fact that this is editor's night and we can talk as editors. We won't get too technical, everybody. We're not going to talk about codecs and machines and things. We're going to talk about the spirit of this, which I think Carla and I both like very, very much care about as the core reason we do this is the spirit and the music itself. First of all, yes, thank you for asking about the team, because obviously I was just a small part of it, really. It's first of all, Morgan Neville, of course, considered to be kind of a genius at this kind of cultural zeitgeist film. These wonderful looks at not, but all that binds together as culture and as art, and he's had a long history of obviously right over my shoulder here is 20 Feet from Stardom, which is the second film I worked with him on, a film called Troubadours, the Laurel Canyon scene, and some of the wonderful music of the early 70s. And from Stardom, of course, was a big hit. And but even as that film was going towards the end of that, there were the machinations of really wanted to do this film with Yo-Yo Ma's ensemble, which was something his worldview of how do we make this matter? How do we make the music and the art matter? Not just it's great music, but how does it matter in a bigger way? He admired Yo-Yo for talking about this, for being kind of a restless, somebody who always wanted to have more meaning. And Yo-Yo talks about this, at the beginning of the film. What's really great as a thing for Yo-Yo is he's kind of done with, he's restless. It's like, okay, I'm really good at this thing I do, but what is this thing I do? What does it matter? What with art? That's what Leonid Bernstein says, is with their art, what does it matter? And how do you make it matter? And in a world with all these whole events going on and these regional conflicts, possibly change that? How do we make that mean more than just entertainment or something that makes you it's how do we use it to bring people together and create bridges? And Yo-Yo started out that way, and he talks about that in the film. But what's great about the film is that's what the film's about too. And what I loved about the mission of the movie and how it got started was, how do we express this in a movie the way that the music expresses it culturally, with all of these different influences from across the Silk Road and beyond? And it was a really great challenge, because how do you express that filmically and not get lost in the weeds? How do you not have it just be a giant jumble of random influences? And I think that's where this wonderful team really just hammered away at it for so long and got it right. And I have to shout out to the two people who probably worked hardest on it, which were Helen Kearns, who's an amazing editor as well, and she's done a lot of work on many different films, and Jason Zeldis, who also has worked a lot with Morgan and has done some other shows with him as well. So they were the day-to-day frontline editors. I was the supervising editor, and I was editing throughout the whole process and working with them to coordinate the film and stitch it together, which was a big task. We'll talk about that. Uh-oh, did I lose my video there? Okay.
Yeah, I think that we're gonna have you in sound only, just to make sure that we're hearing the sound.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. Yeah, is it stuttery?
Yeah, but I think we're hearing you better. So I'm just gonna go ahead and ask you the next question.
Sure. I'm sorry.
So it's great to hear you though, but I'm so happy that you I'm so happy that you articulated it as the music, why does the music matter? Because that's how I felt watching the film, is that in the creation of the film, you really made the music matter, and the music kind of was like it became a narrative voice. It it was almost like looking at the characters, having a conversation with the music they make, and the music had, we were able to savor it. Like, you brought a lot of space for the music to really talk to us. So I wanted to ask you, like, if you can expand on that, and if that was the intention from the beginning.
Absolutely. And the beauty of a piece like this is that you have this wonderful vessel to move scenes across into other scenes, and that's the music itself. So one of the things I think Morgan is so good at is when there is musical content like this, diegetic music that comes from the people in the film, you have these different vessels to create bridges between scenes and between characters. And you'll notice that different compositions of the Silk Road Ensemble blend in from one to the next, and it transports you from one feeling and mood, perhaps one story is a little lighter and one story that's a little darker, and you're shifting with the pieces, and also culturally shifting with the instrumentation. So we were very sensitive to see if a particular piece expressed more, for instance, that it felt more Chinese, for instance, if it was trending towards Wu Man's work or the other Chinese artists in the Silk Road Ensemble, we'd use that to transition ourselves into the Chinese diaspora, and likewise with Spain or with Iran, we would do these very deliberate uses of particular pieces that stressed that culture more. So that was, in some ways, that was almost the easiest part, was we could find pieces that would help us get there. But, and I think you and I both know, multi-character films are some of the hardest challenges that we have, because how does everybody get enough time to really have a story? And in this case, we have 5 major characters that we're telling story arcs for, and including Yo-Yo, who has sort of a master's arc. We don't actually tell Yo-Yo's story quite as much as the rest of them, because he never wanted it to be centrally his story. He really wanted to accentuate those in the Silk Road Ensemble who came from these places around the world. And the common bond between each of them was that they all had some way lost something or were losing something, and that they were looking for a way back home. And I think that was something early on that we recognized, is every story had that kind of hero's quest. You're faced with, you're missing something, or you're losing something, whether it's your culture or your home. In the case of Kehan Flor, who literally couldn't go back to Iran, or somebody like Christina, who was losing her mom in phases to Alzheimer's, and those common bonds of loss and trying to find a place you can call home. Turns out that the Silk Road Ensemble is the place that they all call home, in the film. So that made it a really interesting stitch to put together via all of these quests and these arcs of these characters. And we would puzzle over, like, where does this character go, and how do we balance that with this other character? And it took a long time, a lot of corkboard, a lot of moving pins and 3x5 cards around on a wall to figure out who would go where and how that story influenced the one before it and the one after it. And we just talked for hours and hours.
To do that, I thought it was so successful. I mean, I really love the use of music as bridges and transitions, and even the way that you used it to go to the past, and these montages. Like, I remember the moment with Yo-Yo Ma a little bit early on, where he's playing one piece of music, and you have all this archival of him playing throughout years, and moments like that just work so beautiful in the film. Like, just the way that you use music really to bridge and to transition, maybe not only from one character to the next, but also like emotionally within the character development. It was really, really beautiful. We have a great question from the audience, actually, from Luis. They're asking, how did they create the music? This was not addressed in the film.
Well, in terms of creating it, I mean, at first, they all got together at that seminar at Tanglewood in the year 2000. And Yo-Yo himself admitted that, what is this? this just a giant cultural mashup? Is this just going to be a fun diversion for us for the summer? Is this just a playground, and is it mean anything after this? We all had a nice vacation at Tanglewood, and we made some music. And then what he says, and I think this is really resonant in the film, is that 9/11 happened, and Yo-Yo himself was displaced from his own home and was stuck out in the middle of nowhere at that time, trying to get home by bus. And he thought about it, and he said, how do we as musicians make meaning out of something so horrific, and how do we transcend it? Especially, he anticipated the discord that would come, and the cultural schisms that would happen because of 9/11. He said, we can be the pushback to that. We can show that people can come together and make harmony out of different places and different styles and different walks of life, even different languages. And I thought that was so beautiful, because it sets the whole film up for how could these two musicians and two musical instruments that don't even tune to the same scale and don't have any of the same traditions come together and make beautiful music in harmony with each other. And that was the goal of the entire thing. So in terms of making the music, they would get together in studios. There's a great sequence, a great montage sequence, that is the ramping up of a studio session. It's a very loud one too. It starts gently and then gradually becomes this big cacophony of sound that they make, including Christina Passo, who's one of the most amazing people I've ever met. She's just ferocious, and you hear her in the film playing the bagpipe, and the gaita actually is what it's called in northern Spain, and she is known as the Jimi Hendrix of the gaita, and she is so powerful on that instrument. So you see her at the end with that yell of pure life going "ow" at the end. And I think if you want to know how the music is made, that's how they make the music. They just all fall into it. And yes, there's sheet music and they play parts, but there's a lot of compositional stuff that happens improvisationally as they rehearse, and then they build pieces and they all come together that way. So watching them do it, which we did a little bit, and we witnessed that on camera, is really wonderful, because everybody's allowed to speak up and say, here, let's insert this here, or try this. It's not Yo-Yo telling everybody what to do. It's a leaderless organization in that sense, only because Yo-Yo doesn't make it about him. It's not really centrally about him. He's the biggest name, but not in any way, the one who stands out in the middle of the pack. He very purposefully has everybody contribute. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I will mention one thing, that as a fellow editor, I know how hard it is to edit music. And so kudos to you and the team for doing that, especially the opening. Like that was, I'm sure, a much longer music song, and maybe like two different songs. And it was just so beautifully put together. So, and like, yeah, it is so difficult to do. So that was amazing. I'm gonna ask you one more question, and then maybe we can go to the clip and maybe the special surprise we have for people.
Maybe special guest.
So obviously you mentioned 5 characters there. It's quite a bit of characters that are blended so beautifully in the film. Were there other characters that they were following that didn't make the film? How did the team choose to follow these particular characters that were the focus of the film?
That's a hugely important question to this film, because there were so many compelling stories. And yes, we followed a bunch of other characters. In fact, I think there were 8 or 10 who were potential primary characters. And the question that we asked for every character as we developed it and we looked at the raw footage was, is there a quest here? Is there a loss that character is obviously seeking to recover or to grow beyond through the Silk Road Ensemble and in their own lives? And the most compelling stories we had, obviously, was and is such a tragic situation, and to have a Syrian character was really important to us. I think that reflected so much on where the world was then and is still, sadly, dealing with in that situation. Kayhan's story from Iran was really compelling, because story there, which I cried a few times. Story trying reunion with his wife when he goes he actually meets, I think, because that's a neutral ground that they can, and that one moment where you see two people who haven't seen each other for months, and they have that beautiful moment where they just embrace, so there was a love story of lovers separated there. A Wuman story about going back to China that's changed, cultural evolution, really powerful, I think, because she's trying to a changing China, and what does it mean to be a Chinese American now that she lives here? How does that affect her background and her music and her cultural world? And of course, Yo-Yo, who is the ultimate, child of many influences, and his sort of artistic restlessness. I think that, at the end, he comes back to sort of this point of peace when he listens to the girl. And it's, in a way, it's handing the baton off to another generation. And there's so many beautiful moments in this that we got lucky a lot. And just moments would happen, and we happened to be lucky enough to be there. So, yeah, in terms of constructing this, we between luck and some incredibly skillful group ideas, every ideas into this. And I was so proud of the team, because somebody would come running in going, I got an idea. And we would put it up on the wall and we would try it. And we tried so many things. But ultimately, certain things stuck and certain things went into the bin, which is a beautiful dustbin, but we didn't use so many of them.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question that we just got from Vicky that was also in my mind, and then we'll move to the clip. Just because you also mentioned this specific storyline. So Vicky asks, why doesn't Keihan's wife join him until they can return together?
They are circumstantially separated by certain facts of Keihan's situation in Iran. He got in some hot water with the authorities over some positions he held, I'm sure, and he loves his country, and he really desperately wanted to go back. In fact, in the film, he was going to return to play his first concert in Iran in years and years, and he's considered a national hero in Iran. He's the master of his instrument, but the government hasn't allowed him to return. And necessarily, he and his wife are separated. She has stayed in Iran, and he went to America to continue his career. And they meet up out on the road. They meet up in places where they can, like Istanbul. She now is occasionally able to come to visit him in other places. And I don't know, to be honest, I haven't checked in the last short while whether or not they've had a more stable situation. But safe to say that Keihan would love to be able to go back and spend time in Iran and be in the culture that he grew up in.
But is that something that you chose not to answer, like why she stayed and not left the country with him?
It's so complicated. It's family issues, and it was so complicated that we thought it's better to say that he is essentially feeling expelled from his own culture, which is true. And he was told at one point, we got so close to getting him back to Iran, and the government said, no, we're canceling the concert, you're not coming. And this was days before it was going to happen. We had the crew and everything. So yeah, in a sense, it's not pulling any punches. It really was sort of the situation that they were in, with him constantly trying to get back to Iran and not being able to do it.
Yeah. So talking about all these amazing potential characters that you had, and I'm sure you made some really tough decisions in the edit. Will you introduce the clip and our special guest?
Yes. A wonderful fellow Southern Californian. This is a clip that is one of the performances by a part of the Silk Road Ensemble. When they perform, sometimes it's only a part of the ensemble, depending on whose schedules come together at the right time. So this is a performance with a number of different elements of the the ensemble, and one special guest who you'll see playing the shakuhachi, which is the Japanese flute. And I'll let our guest introduce himself when he comes on. So we'll roll into the clip, I guess, and you can see his amazing performance in this. Hypnotic.
Wow, that was really powerful. Do we have Ko here? Hi. Oh, I can hear you now. Great.
Great, wonderful. Great to join you.
Thank you for joining us.
Of
That was so
course, of course.
beautiful.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I'm, 2009, 10 years ago, I'm sort of like in this, we're in this sort of environment where we have to stay at home. My hair is coming back to that level of 2009, I see.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let
Hi,
me
Doug.
ask you,
Hey, Cal.
the basic question is, how did you get involved with ensemble? And I guess the heavier question will be like, what has it meant to you to be part of this family, and has it affect you and your
Sure.
music?
Sure. See ya. Bye. No. Um, so, no, I got involved with the ensemble in 2001. So I know Doug was talking about the Tanglewood sessions in 2000 a little earlier. So it was a year after that. To make a long story short, I got a call from the first executive director of Silk Road, and his name is Ted Levin, somebody I knew from grad school, and he called me up and said, "Hey, Ko, do you want to play a piece for shakuhachi and cello?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course, I'll do it." And then he told me who the cellist was, and so I practiced all summer. Went down to Tanglewood, met up with Yo-Yo, and then from there it was just it just somehow continued. Very lucky for me.
And how has it affected your music, you personally, to be part of this family?
Well, I think for all of us who've been involved, I hate to use the cliche, but it's been absolutely definitive and transformative in terms of how we view music.
Mm-hmm.
I think, there are a lot of, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to throw out a lot of cliches in this context because we don't have a lot of time, but I think a lot of ideas early on that were expressed included ones like we can actually learn more about our instruments by observing other performers and musicians. And so, certainly there's the ability to sort of, for example, in my case, look at an instrument like the Persian ney, which is a vertically held flute, similar to the one that I play right here, which I have,
Mm-hmm.
and um, thinking about how, even from a theoretical perspective, of how their music is built from a tetrachordal system, and thinking about that and looking at the classical music that comes from Japan, and being able to observe, being able to look at the music in those terms and finding new things and finding, musical truths within that. Those kinds of, you wouldn't typically end up arriving at those views of maybe the music that comes from your own tradition, without actually stepping out and kind of looking backwards onto it, right, with new information. So in that sense, it's absolutely transformative about understanding your instrument. It's also, there's certainly things like, Doug, you were referring to, different kinds of tuning systems, especially with the Persian classical music. That's a great example, and how there are microtonal systems that are very different from the way Western common practice music works. And the ability for your ear over the years, after just playing over and over again, doing concerts and so on and so forth, your ears to actually become more sensitive to why what happens is you go from like, oh, this sounds out of tune, to like, oh, wow, this is actually meaningful in a certain way. The fact that there is this kind of dissonance, what used to sound like dissonance, it actually turns out to be actually musically meaningful. I don't know, these are vague terms, but I think those are kind of two areas I think that that most of us probably feel have been a really great part of being in Silk Road.
Well, I know nothing about music, but I understood all of that.
I don't believe you, Carla. I don't believe you, Carla.
I always,
Possible, Carla.
I like to compare. I can dance, not play anything, but I guess that's what we have in common.
Yes.
Would you be open to playing something for us?
Sure. I'll just play a go-to piece that I play. And because we've talked a lot about home, right? I think, Doug, you were talking about this. Carla, you were talking about this too. This is just a piece that comes from the region where my father's from, which is in the southern part of Japan, Kumamoto to be exact. And it's about a young girl who's working for a wealthy family, and she loves all the things that she gets food, she gets good clothes, but she can't go home herself, and she's singing this lullaby to the baby, those words to the baby that she's taking care of. It's called Itsuki no Komori Yuta. It was a short version. Short version.
Oh, thank you.
There you go.
That was so beautiful,
Thank you.
especially right now.
Yeah, right? The
Yeah,
longing to go home in some ways, even though we are stuck at home, it's the same kind of feeling of trying to reconnect, perhaps, and also
yeah,
to reconnect with your families that are spread out all over the world. And
yeah. It's interesting. I am an immigrant. I came when I was 15 to the States, and my concept of home just completely changed because I would never feel home back in my country or completely here. So home for me means people.
absolutely,
Yeah, that we're far
absolutely,
away from.
yeah.
Um, so, going back a little bit to the themes of the film, what really struck me and it was really powerful for me was this message of music being a tool to work out trauma and kind of face it straight on and then transform it and the moment that that is kind of like everything came together for me was the 9/11 reflection moment that Yo-Yo Ma has. And actually one of our audience members also brought it up. His name is Paul, and he says visually the 9/11 sequence was so striking. um, the series of silent, moody images with a VO of the 9/11 audio and scored perfectly. How did you arrive at that brilliant combination to tell the 9/11 section?
That's a good question, because that's one of those places where the editors are encouraged to find not just the images that are recorded at that moment when that story was told, but to interpret that from all the things that we had. And we had all this wonderful imagery, some of which had nothing to do with that time and that place, but spoke to it artistically. I mean, we had this beautiful foggy footage from China that was just like the trees in fog. Went with Yo-Yo's story of trying desperately to get home when he was stuck. I believe he was stuck in Nebraska. He's on the road, and 9/11 happened, and so he had to have this journey looking out at a landscape that was, not his own, and to get home. We had this wonderful foggy, tree-lined highway that had just been shot, kind of as additional footage, and it was just really beautifully with that. There's also luckily a shot of Yo-Yo sort of lying in repose. It's at his place or it is hotel. I'm trying to remember. And it's a perfect moment to say, I've been overwhelmed by something. So that was part of the visual style of all that. Yeah, it's just, you know, everything was allowed on this film in terms of any image that says what the emotion should be was potentially useful, especially in the transitions between the. We have these sort of brief montages of the world in sound, and that idea we played with for a long time. Helen did a lot of those montages, and Morgan would come in and, yeah, let's add a little more of this, or let's try this, or let's put this segue here. And it was so delicious because you get to play with all of this footage and you just get to construct things. So there was so much composition in this. It was like making music. It was really wonderful.
Yeah, I really love those transition moments were kind of like these dreams to me, like people memories, or you know, even kind of posing a question to the world, it felt. So those work really nicely. And I really also love how, you know, in editing, a lot of times we talk about like the peaks and valleys of a film, and you went from that, you know, very kind of dark, reflective moment right into Christina, who had like this big energy, and you know, she faced the hardships of Galicia, and you know, it just like, it felt like a change that we needed at that moment. So that worked really beautifully. I want to ask you a question that it's come up with our audience a couple of times. I know, Doug, you answer it, but I would love to get your answer, Ko, as well. You know, this process of composing the music. So somebody's asking, were all the performances entirely extemporaneously? I can't pronounce that. Or were there elements of composed performance?
Been muted by, oh, there we are. Okay, unmuted by the host. Thank you. Well, I think the pieces, you know, I mean, the ensemble has been around for almost 20 years, or, you know, basically 20 years now. So there are a lot of ways in which the pieces sort of come to be. But I can sort of break them down. This is probably not very exciting, but I can break them down to certain kinds of categories. And one of them that's really central, I think, to what we've been doing is to commission compositions. So that's one thing, one way. And those are composers who are, you know, like-minded composers who are not regularly part of Silk Road, but we've commissioned them to write pieces who have sort of, you know, have an interest in actually experimenting with bringing different traditions together, musically speaking. So, and that kind of process usually involves, I think Doug was, you know, mentioned this too, but we need to have kind of a lingua franca for representation oftentimes. And then not everybody in the ensemble actually does read music. But for the most part, we, you know, Western common practice notation is sort of our lingua franca. So the pieces will come in this way. We will, you know, there'll be an opportunity to do a residency at a university, for example, or at Tanglewood, where we have several days to work up the pieces. And then when we go out on tour, you know, it's usually just maybe one day, two, if we're lucky, to put together the program and then go. So commission works, but there also, in the past, we've looked at people bringing in arrangements of folk melodies or classical pieces, right, from their own tradition, and trying to figure out how to make that work. There's a beautiful piece called Ascending Bird that Colin Jacobson brought in, which is a folk tune that was I think he heard it on a bone whistle in Iran while he was visiting Iran. And it was originally arranged for like string quartet and pipa, and then people are finding their ways in to the piece, so that by the end, they're like, it's an all-play piece, as we call it, where we can have 20 musicians playing this folk melody from Iran that Colin has arranged. But we're finding our ways in to that, not because it's been written down, but because we're trying to, you know, apply idiomatic practices that we would have in our instruments to try to fit into that. So that's also a listening process. There are certain traditions like Indian classical music or Persian classical music that in which improvisation is central to their practice, and so there's music that is highly improvisatory as well. There are pieces that are composed by ensemble members that get developed. So those are kind of four basic categories, I think, in which music actually comes to be in the ensemble.
So we have a huge Tandan fan in the audience, Vicky, who asked 2 questions about him. I think she would have liked to see him more in the film. And was he one of the commissioned composers?
Oh, you know him really well, so yeah, go ahead.
Hold on. There we go. Yeah, Tandon was involved, I think, in the early 2000 Tanglewood workshop, and so I think they had. I can't remember. I'm sure. Sorry, there's a dog in the place, and he's hungry. But yeah, I wouldn't be able to speak with that. But Tandon was mostly involved, I think, in the first year or two in helping Yo-Yos get this off the ground, providing some works that were already written that I think they workshopped at Tanglewood in 2000. And it may have been on some of those early tours. And I apologize to the person asking the question. I love Tandon too, but
we have a documentary about Tandon.
Right, there we go. We're waiting for that. It's going to happen.
Every one of you guys deserves your own documentary.
So Doug, this is a question for you. I was just amazed at how, the film kept going like deeper and deeper into each person's story in such an intimate way. And I was just wondering how, what was the process of, how was the team able to get so intimate with the characters?
Well, I definitely credit our production team. Morgan he's wonderful to work with. He's like he's a microphone that's always on, and he's absorbing things, and he doesn't try to dictate the process too much. He observes and he finds the great stuff, and he kind of zooms in on that. We had an amazing crew, our DP and our field crew and our producers. So we were really able to get the trust. I think the trust is really important to get into the organization and be just kind of flies on the wall instead of imposing our vision or throwing a million lights in there. And we shoot beautiful stuff over at Tremolo, but it's not intrusive. And I think we tried to be very organically a part of the sessions and times we were there. And fortunately, I guess, the Silk Road Ensemble is pretty used to maybe having cameras around now and then. So we were sort of blending in with the woodwork as much as we could. But I think the field trips, and Morgan and the crew, that I wish I could have been on the field team on this one, because they circled the globe twice doing this, and multiple trips to China and Istanbul and Spain, and just constantly great trips going out there. And all of those Verte trips out into the world, every one of them had such wonderful footage, and there were so many things we could have done with those. But we kept it always on the main line of the story. So we would cut each character's story as an individual film almost. And we'd say, what are the valuable parts that contribute to the movie, as opposed to a great singular story that would be a separate film? And that's where the hard decisions had to happen. Like, what aren't we going to use? And we could make another Music of Strangers out of the stuff we didn't use, I'm sure. But these stories, I think, were the ones that popped the most after we'd done these narratives.
Sorry, I just got another question that I was reading. Let me ask this one fun question. So it's really interesting because as editors, we don't get to meet the people because we don't go out in the film and hold the cameras and spend time with you guys. But we spend so much time with you. because we see all this footage of you, and you know, we spend every day just looking at what you're saying and how you play music. So it's very strange for us because we feel like we get to know you very intimately. So Doug, the question is for you. What's the experience like to finally meet the characters, and what was the reaction of the characters to the film?
This is the thing that's unique for documentary editors, because we mostly sit in rooms just like we're in now, and we get to know people intimately really well. We don't meet them a lot of times. I met nobody, I think, on in the SRO until we got to Toronto, or not very many. I think I met Wuman once and a few others. But when we got to Toronto, suddenly everyone's there, including Ko. And Ko and I actually have a pact that I owe him a really nice margarita one of these days, because you were very kind at a bar in Toronto when I needed it most. You just showed up with this wonderful blue concoction and said, "Hey, you know, we'll do this again." So I owe you a really nice margarita, Ko, or a drink of your choice, any beverage. Plus, we're both teachers. And what's really wonderful is I didn't know that until I met you in Toronto, and we started talking about education and the crossover between you teaching music and me teaching film. And we've pledged, and of course, as these things go, we haven't made it happen yet, but I'm renewing my pledge that I want you to come and talk to my students, and I would love to come to talk to your students whenever that can happen. So these are the good things that happen. Yeah, from you to me and me to you, exactly. But yeah, it's the weirdest thing, because, and Carla, we were talking about this, the problem with an editor getting to meet their people at last is they have no control over them anymore. So they can say and do whatever they want instead of what we want them to say and do. And I keep saying, no, you can't do that. That's not in your character. That's not part of your art. And meanwhile, it's like off they go and they live their lives. And I've had a lot of fun meeting people and having that terrible imbalance. Like, I know every you have seen me before. Hi, how are you? It's part of the fun of editing, or the terror of editing.
What was it? What was the experience of watching the film for the first time? Ko? Did you hear? Yeah.
Did we?
Great. Yeah, I can't unmute myself. I don't have the editor's control over the situation.
We're doing some editing right now. It's like, you can only answer this one.
I know, you guys are good. Just before I answer that, Doug, you know, the reason why that margarita came out was because we knew you guys, the editors, would be disappointed, right, when you met us. So, you know, we had to sort of like grease things up a little bit. And I think it was for Helen and Jason as well. We had some margaritas all together. But
That's right.
yeah. Well, so let's see. I've actually, you know, obviously this film has been part of recent sort of Silk Road activity, or, you know, maybe it's about 3 years ago when things started to come to an end. But you know, I watched the film a lot, many times, because we were presented on concert tours separately. And in fact, I've probably watched it more times than the number of hairstyles Shane Shanahan has, who's one of the percussionists, looking at his hairstyles over like 15 years of footage. But you know, you start to notice things. I think compositionally. I mean, I'm not a film person, but I really, you know, over the course of watching that film a number of times, I've come to appreciate a lot of things that are like what was referred to earlier about the compositional decisions that were made in that film. Really subtle things. There's a you were talking about one of the, you know, tougher segments earlier about the 9/11 sequence, and right before, I think it's Yo-Yo's voice, where he unveils the fact that, you know, and then 9/11 happened. There are things like just a short clip of a lamp on a wall right? But it's not a single light. It's actually one of these lamps that branches out into two, like a twin lamp, right? And details like that, I think, were things that I'd noticed kind of early on in watching this, uh, um, watching the film. And what it does is that it opens up my mind to thinking, okay, there's a lot of discussion that's happened that we don't know about, and decision making that has happened. And what it's trying to do is linking image and sound to ideas, which then allows me to continue. Like now I know that there's a lot in here to discover. And so over time, I found many things in there that I found to be, quite subtle, probably overlooked by most people, but including Shane Shanahan's 11 haircuts. And there's some things that I think even maybe the people shooting the film didn't quite realize was going on. And there's this beautiful sequence about in Wuman's section. It ends, and basically the story there is that there's a tradition that's dying, and the last shot is where Wuman is out in the fields, and there's a sort of like a monument, a stone monument that's in front, where where the shot is of her and the stone monument. I don't think you guys know that that's a grave.
I did not notice.
Because if you read the script, I mean, we read it from Japanese, right? But you can basically understand the Chinese script because we stole it from China.
Yeah.
And just a lot of things like that. There's it creates more and more layers of meaning, I think, and I think that's really, really compatible with, I think, what we're trying to do as an ensemble.
So
thank you for remembering that. The lamp shot was one of my favorite moments in that sequence. Oh, that it all comes back to me when you say that. It's amazing.
So I don't know how much time we have, but I do have two questions that I hope we can get through. So maybe very briefly, but I'm just wondering if you as a group are doing, and this is a question that Jason texted me actually, any cultural preservation work, or individually, if you're doing that. You mentioned some of that, the culture dying in the film. So is that some work that you guys are doing? Carl? You will be unmuted. There you go. I think you've been
mute myself. Okay.
There you go.
I got it. So my best answer to that, and I think you're going to find different answers from every member or every artist in the ensemble. But Silk Road was designed, I think, to sort of help to evolve traditions and keep them relevant by looking at ways of innovating practices. Right, and that's the way in which, if you want to call it preservation, I know that's a debatable way of talking about it, but I think Silk Road is designed for the way in which traditions continue to become to be relevant by innovation. But I will also say that many of the ensemble artists in their own practices find it very important, again, to go this idea of going back to home, right, and seeking home. In that sense, they're on an individual basis, I think there are sort of practices of preservation that are going on. That's my best answer today.
Great. I have one last question for, I guess, the both of you, but we're going through a tough time. I'm personally very close to New York City, and in New Jersey, like around us, like it's just incredibly sad and dark times around, in our neighborhoods. And there was just a moment that gave me a little hope when I was watching the film, which is, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but Keenan? Is that right? When, he kind of makes the urgency of the need for music, and the need to think about people that are more vulnerable than we are, and that just like it just like really hit home at this point, when he's talking about like, you know, this is what's happening now in the refugees camps, and you know, people have died because of the weather. So the question is like, what do you want people to think about now, you know, in the moment that we're living right now? What do you want them to take from the film and to take from music? Whoever wants to
Oh,
answer.
you can take that one, and I've got something to say to that too. But go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be brief so I can hand it to Doug as well. But you know, I mean, these are things that. So I there's a wonderful bass player who's a Silk Road artist, Edward Perez, based in New York. He says something really, really simple, I think that many of us have heard before, but he says, music might be one of the quickest ways in which you can make friends, because you're playing something together, right? There's this sense of being connected with people moment to moment. Like music is, you know, it changes really quickly. It's ephemeral, right? And to be able to do something together at that sort of tempo and that and that kind of I don't want to call it urgency, but certainly something that's created in that moment. It's like once you do that, you become friends. And I think hopefully the film conveys that idea. So when we do come together, right, there's something beautiful can happen, and you can never go back from those special moments. Those are always going to be there with you. So that's one big part, I think, that I hope we can just continue to think about that in this world. And I do believe that, you know, there are opportunities in this really horrible situation we're in. It may very well be the fact that we have to be apart right now is going to allow us to think of new ways to come together. And for an ensemble like Silk Road, where everybody's spread out in the world anyway, right? Maybe we're going to find even more ways and additively to connect with each other that we can share with the world.
Yeah, let's do that.
I'm with you.
Great. And I have one quote, one of my favorite quotes from the whole film, and there's so many moments in there. Ko, you have a great moment in the trailer where you say, "We all need hope," which is so simple. I love that it's true. We do need that always. But there's another moment where, and I'm paraphrasing it, but the quote is, "In every attempt to crush the human spirit's answer is to revenge with beauty." And I feel like that is the greatest artist credo I think I've ever heard, is to revenge with beauty. It just says so much in so few words. So that's just a perfect way, I think, for me to close out my feelings on working on this film, working with you wonderful people, Ko, you and the whole SRO. Where it's still one of my favorite experiences I've ever had working on a film, and it sticks. I mean, I watch the performances still. I play the records, and I remember the Hollywood Bowl show, and it's just, there's so much revenging with beauty that you guys do. So thank you guys for what you do.
And thank you both for participating.
Thank you, Carla. Great questions.
It was so much fun.
Yeah,
I know.
wonderful. Thank you, Carla. Doug, that
was
was really great. Thank you for letting me join.
Yeah, I'm so glad you could do it, Ko. Thank you for being here. It's really sweet. And we will see each other again.
Absolutely. All of us.
Yes.
We'll get together.
Yes.
Margaritas. All of us.
Yeah,
Promise.
there's a fitness now.
Right. And Doug's paying.
Yes, I am paying. Everybody gets a margarita on me. all 28 of you in the chat.
Alrighty. And at that, now I don't know what happens. Does Jason come on, or do we just say goodbye?
It's our party now.
Goodbye.
There he is.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
I'm
Thanks,
happy to come back
Jason.
on. I just want to say thank you, Carla and Co. and Doug, and for being here for tonight, but also for the work that you do every day. Carla RBG inspired so many of us, and we still carry that. And all of us who watched the film again, I know it uplifted a lot of spirits this week. So thanks for the work in doing that. Thanks for the work that you're doing every day. We need you more than ever right now. And the film, which is about hope and resilience and revenging with beauty, we're grateful to have it in the world. And we're gonna say goodbye with another track. Please remember to fill out your surveys and sign up for the next wonderful living room programs. Tuesday, the Yes Men program. Friday, Street Fight, which is a fantastic political film. The following Tuesday, we have Donald Nally and Peter Sellers, and there's much more to come. So check it out at the website. We have an ongoing fundraiser called Save Your Seat at ccasantafe.org. It's a great way to support us. Those of you who are out of town who want to support your local group or support multiple groups, art organizations need your support right now. It's a tough time for us, and we're going to be here to help when the world opens up again. So we're going to leave with another clip. Again, thank you guys for joining us, and we will see you next Tuesday.